Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is rewind. Let's take a moment and begin our look at this verb by reviewing some of its definitions or its meanings. The first way you might encounter the verb rewind can mean to wind a tape or film back to the beginning. Now, this particular verb was more commonly used when VHS tapes or cassette tapes were really popular forms of technology in sharing entertainment. So, like with movies or TV shows or music. Now, the verb here gets used a little less commonly in this way, but that idea of taking something back to the beginning still holds true. And we'll see some examples of that a little bit later where rewind really means to take something back to the beginning. Now, a second way you might encounter the verb rewind can mean to wind something again or to wind it anew. So last week, our final verb of the week was to unwind something, and that connected back to our base verb of wind, which could mean to encircle something around a spool or itself, perhaps. And then we said un is undoing that process, and now we are redoing or starting that action of encircling or wrapping something again with that second meaning. For now, you should know that rewind is an irregular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms rewinding. The past tense and the participle form of our verb have a spelling change. We're going to take the letter I and change it to an OU. And the past tense and the participle form of our verb will be pronounced like this. Rewound. Rewound. Okay. Now, we don't have any phrasal verbs that we need to study, so we'll move on and do a little verb tense review with our verb of the day. Today, we're going to practice the imperative and the simple future. Let's start with the imperative. We use this to tell someone either to do an action if it's positive or affirmative, or to not do a particular action if this is negative. So this is, the imperative is really about giving a command to someone. Again, do this or do not do this. And the imperative is unique in English because we do not have a stated subject. That's because the subject is implied. If I'm speaking or I'm writing to one person, the subject is understood to be you singular, that one person to whom I am speaking. But if I'm speaking or writing to a large group of people, two or more, again, the subject here is you plural. So if you want to make a sentence in the imperative, you can begin with the base verb. You can see that in my example here. Rewind the tape before you return it. Okay? This was a strong command that many parents had for their children. Again, back in the 80s, maybe early 90s still, when VHS tapes were being rented as a form of entertainment. And that's because if you brought it back and you had not taken the film back to the beginning, you might get charged a quarter, 50 cents, or even maybe in later years, $1 extra. Okay? Now, if you want to make a negative imperative sentence, just begin with do not and then the base verb. You could also use the contraction don't. That's used in my example here. Don't rewind all the way to the beginning. Right? So someone might want you to back up a little bit with a piece of tape, but not to the very beginning here. Now, sometimes students will tell me that it can feel rude or impolite to make sentences in the imperative. So remember, you can always add the word please to the beginning in either the affirmative or negative, or you could put a please at the end of the sentence, but you only need it in one place there. Now let's move on and look at some sentences in the simple future. Today we're going to discuss how we do this using the be going to form of the simple future. This form of the simple future is commonly used as people discuss their plans. We might also see it as people make predictions and promises or offers, but it's a little less commonly used. Now, if we're making a sentence in the simple future with be going to, we have to pay attention to our subject. And that's because we'll be using a present form of be. This means if my subject is I, I'm going to use am, going to, and then the base verb. But if my subject is you, we, or they, I'll use are, A-R-E, going to, and then the base verb. Finally, if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is going to, and then the base verb. So let's take a look at an example sentence here. No amount of Botox is going to rewind time. Okay. Now I saw a sentence very similar to this. I think a rather famous celebrity and health professional, or someone who was kind of health adjacent, was making this comment. And so Botox is something some people might use to try and eliminate or reduce the amount of wrinkles that are visible in their face. And so here, what it's saying is really, even if you use a great deal of it, as you get older, it's still going to be obvious, right? We can't make ourselves go back and look like we're a newborn. Now, let's talk about making a sentence in the negative here in the simple future. Again, pay attention to your subject, and then you'll use the form of be that matches, followed by not, going to, and then the base verb. Here's another example. When you are listening to a recording, you're not going to rewind if you lose your place. I saw a sentence very similar to this in an article that was aimed at certain teachers, particularly of some more complex material or complex disciplines. And it was full of advice, encouraging really short sentences, and part of their reason was this explanation that if a lot of, like, as we're reading, sometimes we lose our place, we go back, but you really don't have that option if you're listening to a lecture. Now, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, you want to start with a form of be, whatever form matches your subject. That subject comes next. Then we'll use going to, and then the base verb. Here's another example. Are investigators going to rewind the clock and attempt to determine what events led up to the crash? This would be an example of that idea of kind of going back to the beginning of something. So here, maybe there are some types of some kind of recording. I know this sentence isn't clear about what kind of crash. If it were a plane, there's usually something called a black box that contains a lot of information. And again, that idea of like going all the way back to the beginning to see if there are clues to try and understand why something happened in a particular way. That might be what's being asked in this way. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words related to our verb rewind. What we're going to discuss is now the noun form of this word. The noun rewind, you'll notice, has the exact same spelling and exact same pronunciation as our verb. And this noun can be used in a couple of ways. The first way is to talk about some type of mechanism that exists for either rewinding tape or film. We might think of this as like a button or something that's going to be pressed to begin that process. So, an example, you might hear someone tell you, press rewind now, right? So they're indicating that's the button or the control that needs to be engaged. A second way to use the noun rewind is to refer to the act of rewinding. An example of this in a sentence might be, after George Floyd's death, We were promised a reckoning. We got a rewind instead. An author expressed this sentiment in kind of the at the time of an anniversary, and really what this person was saying, like, we thought there was going to be really big change, but it just feels like we've kind of gone back to the beginning, where no significant improvements have been made in terms of race relations and interactions with police. Well, we don't have any other words. This is a rather limited verb, but I hope it's been a helpful one to study. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.